Hi everyone, it's Jackie Kruger. I have not been a full-time student in about 20 years, but I have an undergraduate degree in psychology from Cornell University, and I have a master's degree in biology that I completed at UIC. For this project, I wanted to look at solving a particular problem, and the problem is the McDonald's drive-through. We have a McDonald's that is less than a half mile from home. It's only a 2-minute drive, and it is directly across the street from an office that we rent. So this is not a daily problem, but it has become a more common occurrence as the COVID-19 situation has unfolded. Here are more details about the problem. So if I do go through the drive-through to get breakfast, this is typically what I would be getting. One of the Egg McMuffins comes with a hash brown, and then an iced coffee, and actually a large size. The software that I was using for this did not have the large size in the database, so I took the small and just adjusted it accordingly. I used the software program that was suggested by Chef Renee, the chronometer, or chronometer, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Here's the macronutrient profile for that breakfast. So the energy or calories are kind of on target for a third of the day's requirement. The protein is definitely on the low side, the carbs are on the high side, and the fats are pretty much on target. If you look at the nutrients of concern, the fiber content is not very good. There is vitamin and mineral content, so calcium, vitamin D, iron, potassium, vitamin C, all good nutrients, and there is significant content there. But if you look at the sodium levels, 50% is obviously a high amount of sodium for one meal. And if you look at the added sugars, the information for this is not actually available either in the software or on the McDonald's website, but you can see the ingredients, and there are added sugars to the English muffin, the Canadian bacon, the hash brown, and also, of course, the iced coffee. So here's the kitchen that we have. It is small. It does not have a whole lot of counter space. And you can see that there are a lot of items that are set up on the countertops. We use these items on pretty much a daily basis, so it's really hard for us to clear the appliances off of the countertops in order to get more workspace. So here's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a breakfast sandwich that would take the place of the Egg McMuffin, and then I also wanted to create a drink, which will be a smoothie, that is a lot more nutrient dense than what I would be getting as part of the McDonald's breakfast. So here are the ingredients for the breakfast sandwich. There's a slice of Dave's Killer bread. There is unsalted butter, an egg, Canadian bacon, pepper jack cheese, and hot wasabi mustard microgreens, which add a really great flavor to the sandwich. So for this, I wanted to focus on whole grains. Dave's Killer bread is about as whole grain as you can get, unless you get sprouted grain bread. Having adequate protein, so protein coming from the egg and the ham and the cheese. Greens that I try to incorporate as much as I can, and of course the taste, which is going to rely a lot on the butter that is going to help with toasting the bread. Here's the cooking process. Obviously nothing elaborate, but I must say I'm still having trouble with scrambling an egg. And it was even more trouble this time because of the pan situation, which I'll talk about in the challenges later. But I did use the same pan to make the egg and also heat up the Canadian bacon and the cheese. And then I used a different pan to actually toast the bread and put the sandwich together. So here's the final product. You can see that I made two versions. One version actually has the Dave's Killer bread, and then the other version has the Dave's English muffin. The Killer bread is definitely more nutrient dense, so that would be the option that would be better. But if you really like English muffins, there's also that option. The microgreens really add a lot of flavor to this and obviously a nice color as well. The cheese, the pepper jack, is probably not the best color option here, but it does give a lot of flavor and it melts fairly well. So on to the smoothie. Here are the ingredients that were used for the smoothie. Pretty much all of them were organic with the exception of the cocoa. So there are dark sweet cherries, baby spinach, Greek yogurt, the cocoa, chia seeds, and the silk almond milk in the unsweetened version. For the smoothie, I wanted to focus on fiber, so definitely increasing fiber content for breakfast. I wanted to avoid added sugars. I wanted to incorporate more protein if possible. Omega-3 fatty acids, really important to me, so the chia seeds provide a lot of that nutrition, and incorporating greens whenever possible, and in this case, dark leafy greens. So the cooking process for the smoothie, obviously not really cooking, but I have a NutriBullet that I use for smoothies on a regular basis. With the NutriBullet, the process is a little bit different because you add the heavier ingredients first and then put the greens on top in order to blend it because, of course, the cup is reversed when it goes on top of the NutriBullet. So here's the final product. It looks like a chocolate milkshake, I hope. It kind of tastes like one, obviously not nearly as sweet, but I also wanted to make sure that I could put this in a cup that was easy to take with me. So I have these cups that come with a top that is very secure and has a hole for a straw. And it's very easy to take this out with me when I leave the house. If you're interested in the specific ingredients, I included this list just so that you can see them. So if you look at the macronutrient profile, this looks a lot better than the McDonald's breakfast. The targets are being hit much more accurately, so the energy is about the same, but protein now goes up to 31% and carbs down to 33%. The fat has gone up a little bit because of the butter and the cheese and the egg, but it's still at 38%, which is not too bad. With the nutrients of concern, fiber content has gone way up, which is great. I like to try and eat as much fiber early in the day as I can so I don't have to worrying about it later in the day. Obviously, the iron, the potassium, vitamin C, vitamin D, and calcium, all of those nutrients have increased as well. The sodium has come down to 33%, which is great. And then there is some added sugar, I think in the Dave's Killer Bread, but you're falling well below the upper limits or the recommended upper limits. So the challenges: keeping sodium and fat at the target levels, definitely a challenge because of the products that get used. There's salt in a lot of the things where you may not realize there is salt. So it was difficult trying to keep the salt level down. I made sure to use unsalted butter and that helped, but it was something that required a lot of attention. And also keeping fat at the target levels. Like I was saying before, the butter, kind of puts the fat over the top, and you don't often think about that, but it's something that has to be taken into account. The pan. So our old nonstick pans are very old, decades old probably, and the coating is definitely starting to come off. So felt like this was a good time to invest in a new nonstick pan. And as a result of this, I spent way too much time on research and too much money for a nonstick pan. But I finally got some from Costco, figured I could return them if they turned out not to be that great. But you have to get used to using a new pan. And when you put an egg into this pan that I bought, it cooks in literally 20 to 30 seconds. So you have to be very fast with the scrambling. And I still did not master that. The eggs were edible and they were good, but they don't look fantastic. Another thing was trying to make the sandwich a to-go food. So obviously when you get something from McDonald's, it is set up to be eaten in the car. And this cannot be eaten in a to-go way. So that was the original intention, but with the microgreens and the construction of the sandwich, it's not really going to work as a to-go item, so that would need to be consumed at home. And then the smoothie can be taken to go. There's also a little bit of difficulty proportioning the food groups according to my plate, because obviously you're not constructing this meal, the whole meal, on a plate, so the proportions may not be exact. I relied mostly on the macronutrient targets in order to make sure that things were balanced. So as far as the cost goes, the cost was not drastically different from what you would spend at McDonald's for these items, but it was different in the fact that most of the ingredients I was using were organic ingredients, and I seriously doubt that that's happening at McDonald's. When I compared the cost per serving for the smoothie, I compared it against the McDonald's smoothie cost. I just put the iced coffee and the hash brown aside. So these costs are actually comparing against similar items on the McDonald's menu. So still very low cost. The total cost per serving of the breakfast sandwich, $1.64, and then the total cost per serving for the smoothie, $3.58. So still low cost, but not as different as I thought it was going to be. But again, the organic ingredients are very different. So conclusion, the food groups of my plate are represented here. So in the breakfast sandwich, both the cheese and the butter count as dairy. The whole grain bread count as the grains. Protein is present in the egg, Canadian bacon, and the cheese. And then the vegetables are represented by the microgreens. Again, the proportions are not really exactly what is shown on the plate, because this isn't a plated meal in the way that my plate is showing. For the smoothie, the dairy, the almond milk, and the Greek yogurt. Protein coming in the form of Greek yogurt and the chia seeds. Vegetables, the baby spinach, and then the fruits are the cherries. So just to do a little bit of comparison to wrap this up, if you look at the McDonald's breakfast versus the homemade breakfast, up at the top in the blue rows, this is a comparison of the macronutrient profiles. So again, the McDonald's breakfast was imbalanced in terms of these macronutrients. If you look at the homemade breakfast, there's a lot better balance of representing about 33% or 1/3 of the daily requirements. If you look at the nutrients of concern in the green rows, you can see that every single one of these things increased, and increased in a very significant way. The two lines at the bottom in the red are things that you would want to keep lower. So sodium was decreased from 50% to 33%, which is a significant improvement. And the added sugars, 20% in the homemade breakfast. Like I was saying before, I don't know the percent from the McDonald's breakfast, but I have to believe that it would have been more than 20% of the daily recommended amount of added sugars.